you got your background.
Yeah, thank you to Andrew for having this, because I couldn't log on to mine. I was at my son. I've been home with my son today because he's been sick, and so I had like 20 minutes to run up to the office and pick this stuff up and didn't get the password, so I apologize. But I think I can do it from this because this looks like what Andy and I may have done a couple of years ago. So it's hard. Martin, what you were talking about with the overall 5 corridors. This is
the switch on the right side.
This is the original transit plan map, and obviously the Blue Line extension was originally to go all the way to 485 north, so you would connect 485 north with 485 south. But now the new project, the one that can be built with the funding available, stops at the UNCC campus. So that's the actual end of the line station. One of the things, I work for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Department, and overall, the Blue Line extension and the Blue Line itself, those are Charlotte area transit system projects, but there's a bunch of different departments that work with CATS in developing in the planning and development stages. So engineering, so Joe, and planning, myself, economic development. And we all work with them on a regular basis because I think overall as a whole, the city of Charlotte recognizes that it's more than just a light rail project, just a transportation project. It's an overall community building project. And like Martin was saying, that recognizes that in order to ride the light rail, you're going to have to get there somehow, and some of those ways would be walking or cycling or using a local bus service or driving the vehicle to a parking ride station. So it's a multimodal. Ultimately, it's a multimodal system. The planning department is focused on the transit station areas too, and I don't know how familiar you are with the Blue Line extension, but there are station area plans for each one of the stations, and they all start kind of from the same basic area. We have transit station area principles. And for our station area, what we are ultimately talking about, you start with a half-mile radius very crudely around where the station is. And then you kind of whittle that away and take out, residential, predominantly residential areas, stable neighborhoods that are, low density, single family that are not likely to redevelop over time. You kind of whittle those things away, and you come up with more like a quarter-mile actual walk distance. And what ultimately you would hope to see is uses that or more higher intensity or really modern intensity. We're not talking about New York City or anything, but more intense than you may see like along Providence Road or some areas of Park Road. The urban form is more compact, so more walkable, so that folks can actually take advantage of living next to a station, getting right on and riding uptown or 45 or wherever they may be going. Also, we don't have any stations right now that are employment focused other than uptown, but that is something that some stations ultimately may have more of an employment focus, so that folks could ride from, either their home or wherever, or 485 to actually their place of work. Very important, and Joe talked about this, and Mark was talking about it too, is that dense interconnected street network that includes the pedestrian system and things like bike lanes. So it's very, the station area plans are very focused on where those pedestrian connections will be. And then some of the work that is being done with the bicycle planning between the stations is important too, because that's the connection of how you actually get to the station. The station areas are typically priority locations for new infrastructure. So a lot of times when you're doing some other sort of pedestrian project, a sidewalk or other things, it's a good time if you're going to be digging things up. You can identify other infrastructure projects, water, sewer lines, things like that may need to happen, pedestrian lighting. And of course, protecting any key environmental features that may exist. And I was just talking about too that transit-oriented development is more compact. You want to focus on housing and jobs and neighborhood services. So typically, you're not going to see like the big box retail or anything like that at your stations. Although you do have that at 485, but more of the service-oriented, either your coffee shops, your newsstands, sundry type services, restaurants, things like that. And housing and jobs, and again, easy walking distance within the station. The station area principles that the city has were actually adopted by City Council in 2001, and they're part of kind of our overall very broad brush general development policies, and they focus on land use mobility and community character. And again, I was talking about that yellow circle would represent the half-mile radius, and then the orange would represent a quarter-mile radius around your station. So the most intense development you would want right out of the station, and then it kind of bleeds out to less intense development as you move away from the station. And again, you want to concentrate a mix of complementary land uses within walking distance. And again, I mentioned a couple times, it's office, residential, ground floor retail. Also, I mentioned enhancing the transportation network because you want folks to be comfortable walking and cycling. And again, when this was done, the USDG urban street design guidelines had not been adopted. They've since been adopted by City Council, and so that's kind of standard operating procedure, like Martin, I think, said, that anytime a city street is upgraded, new streets are constructed, they include lane strip, sidewalk, and in most instances, you have a bike lane depending on what type of street it is. A lot of times, you're not going to need them on like just a local street, but for collectors and thoroughfares, you would. And the design around the station is very important too, because you want people to feel comfortable walking, and you want them to feel like it's a safe place to be. And again, some of those things are like the improved streetscape, but also buildings that front on sidewalks, so that the opening of whatever the building may be, residential project, employment project, retail, that the front door is actually on the sidewalk as opposed to a lot of times you see it in the parking lot. Okay, how do we implement all of these things? And our primary tool is we have 3 transit-oriented development zoning districts. One of them is mixed use, one is focused more on residential, one is focused more on employment. All of them allow kind of a mixture of uses. Obviously, the TODM is going to allow a greater mix of uses than the other 2. And back when the station area plans for the South Corridor were done, the thought was from our department that we would kind of pre-zone things TOD so that the developer wouldn't have to do that. The TOD would already be on the ground, and they could go ahead and develop without having to go through the rezoning process, which is a 4 to 6 month process, and it has a cost associated with it. So we thought that would be a real carrot, and it is. But then we began to realize that when we do that, we are allowing for by right zoning without being able to look at the site plan and comment on what that might be, and kind of work some things out, which is kind of how the rezoning process typically works in Charlotte. So we've kind of backed off of that, and that's not really what we do any longer. So we would support transit-oriented development in those areas, but typically we ask for a conditional site plan and want to look at the site plan and make sure that all of the elements that need to be included are included. For your residential projects that are transit-oriented, there's no maximum density, which is something a little bit different. But your density is going to be somewhat limited by the height, so it's not, again, skyscrapers or anything like that. And also, in terms of the size of your site, because you still have to meet your setback and your yard requirements and your height requirements. But you would be looking at minimum densities as opposed to maximum density. So within a quarter mile of the station, you want to see at least 20 units to the acre. And then as you move out to the half mile between the quarter and the half, the minimum is 15 units to the acre. And the densities are based only on the residential portion of the site. So if you have a project that has an employment component or a retail component, the density for the residential is only based on the residential component of the project. There's also minimum floor area ratios, which is something a little bit different from more suburban type development, and it applies to non-residential uses and mixed use developments where it has residential in the same building. There's no maximum FAR or density, and again, it's kind of determined, it's kind of almost coming a little closer to your form-based zoning in terms of, again, limiting things by height and setback and yard requirements. So we'd be looking at a minimum FAR within a quarter mile of 0.75, so basically using 3/4 of the site, and a minimum of 0.5 within the quarter and a half.
Now, Team Type 1, Rock Racing and Livestrong leading out the peloton. There is young Taylor Finney. He appears to have some sort of mechanical problem. He's slowing down. No, he's stopping. He's stopping in a booth being manned by the Bend, Oregon High School varsity cheerleading squad. He's handing out cards to all the varsity cheerleaders. I can read the cards from here. It reads, "I'm Taylor Finney, but I'm sure you already know that. I'm staying at the Holiday Inn, room 114. Sweet."